Looks like we're live.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Janet. All right, thanks everyone for hanging in there. We were having a few technical difficulties. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We may have some more joining us. Let me go into presentation mode. And Janet, are you seeing the right screen? Does that work?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I think everyone has had a chance to join us. We're running just a moment behind. So just thanks to everyone for your patience. Just to show you really quick before we get going, you have a couple of features available to you through Zoom. We have the raise the hand feature and the Q&A tool. So we'll be using those and we'll go into a little bit more detail here in a few slides. And then I'm actually just going to kick things over to Kevin Snyder with the community. He's the community development director and he has a message for us.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight and taking time out of your busy schedules for a continuation of an important community conversation, the Indio Housing Element Update. As a reminder, the city is required by the state of California to prepare an updated housing element, and this is an element of the city's general plan. And we are in our third community meeting this evening. We really appreciate all the feedback we received to date, and we're excited to hear that more feedback this evening. The DUDEC team, which is our project consultant, and city staff will be walking you through a series of conversations this evening. We're looking for your feedback, and we appreciate any thoughts and ideas that you might have to share with us. After this community meeting, then we will be moving forward to getting a public review draft out that you and the rest of the community can review and give us additional feedback on. So tonight's an opportunity for feedback and then lots more to come. So thank you again for taking the time, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas this evening.
All right. Thanks so much, Kevin. And yeah, like Kevin mentioned, this is our third community workshop. So I think a lot of you are probably becoming really familiar with this process and the housing element itself. So let's move on and get into it. Just a high level overview of what's on our agenda today. We're going to go over some of the features of Zoom. We will introduce the project team. We're going to do a quick recap on the housing element basics that we've discussed in our previous meetings. So if you haven't joined us before, you'll get a little bit of a review of what we've been talking about. We'll get into some of the details on what sort of feedback we've heard to date. Then we will review the draft goal and policy ideas. And finally, we will dive into next steps, then open up the discussion. We do have quite a bit that we're going to be going over tonight. So we're going to work really hard to just move quickly so we can leave plenty of time for the discussion. And for those of you that have not joined us in those previous meetings, we do have a particular format that we choose for these meetings. So once for each slide, we have a format where I present in English and then Janet presents in Spanish. And so it takes a little bit more time, but it gives us that extra opportunity to kind of broaden our outreach a little bit. And so we're going to start that translation once we get into the project review. And Janet will just let everyone know that really quickly.
Buenas tardes, la presentación será traducida en español. Empezaré a traducir cuando presentemos los detalles del proyecto del elemento de vivienda.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Janet. Okay, so while we're getting into these things, I think everyone is pretty familiar with Zoom after the last 2 years, but we will be using the Q&A tool. You can enter into full screen mode. There's the button that it looks like there, and that can really help you with the viewing. And we are recording this meeting. This is on Facebook Live, and it's going to be posted on the city's webpage as well. And then just showing you these features, the raise the hand feature we will be using when we open up the discussion. So when you raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can speak to the group. And then if you're not comfortable speaking to the group, feel free to type in any questions, comments, anything you have along the way in that Q&A feature. All right, so now let's just introduce the project team really quickly. From the city side, you just heard from Kevin Snyder. We also have Layla and Jesus joining us. And then from the DUDEC side, I'm Elizabeth Dixon. And then Janet is also joining us tonight. Okay, so let's review the project and recap some of the information on the housing element that we've covered in the past meetings. And for those of you that have joined us, once again, this will might be a little bit tedious, a little bit repetitive if you've been here before, but we'll move quickly.
Muy bien, ahora empezaremos con un resumen sobre qué es el proyecto del elemento de vivienda.
All right, so what is the housing element? The housing element is one of the mandatory elements of the city's general plan, and all cities are required by state law to update their housing element every 8 years. It contains goals, policies, and recommended actions to address the comprehensive housing needs of the city at all income levels. This includes the housing needs of all current and anticipated households, which includes large families, seniors, renters, homeowners, those experiencing homelessness, and really everyone, because everyone has a housing need. The housing element, it's essentially a roadmap to meeting the housing needs over the next 8 years. It's guided by state law, and so it's subject to state approval. We're entering the 6th update to the housing element, or what we call the 6th cycle, which will cover the planning period of 2021 to 2029, beginning in October. Through the housing element update process, NDO is assigned a number of housing units that it must plan for. For the 6th cycle housing element, we must plan for 7,812 total units, which are further broken down by income level.
El elemento de vivienda es uno de los elementos obligatorios del Plan General de la Ciudad y la ley estatal exige que todas las ciudades actualicen su elemento de vivienda. El elemento de vivienda contiene metas, políticas y acciones recomendadas para abordar las necesidades de vivienda de la ciudad en todos los niveles de ingresos. Esto incluye las necesidades de vivienda de todos los hogares actuales y futuros, incluidas las familias grandes, las personas mayores, los inquilinos, los propietarios y las personas sin hogar. El elemento de vivienda es un guía para satisfacer las necesidades de vivienda durante los próximos 8 años. El elemento de vivienda es guiado por la ley estatal y está sujeto a la aprobación del Estado. Estamos entrando en la 6ª actualización del elemento de vivienda o el 6º ciclo que cubrirá el periodo de planificación 2021 a 2029 a partir de octubre. A través del proceso de actualización del elemento de vivienda, a NDO se le asigna una cantidad de unidades de vivienda que deben planificarse. Para este elemento de vivienda de 6º ciclo, debemos de planificar un total de 7,812 unidades que se desglosan por valor de mercado y unidades asequibles.
All right, thanks, Janet. Okay, so the housing element, it's a pretty extensive planning process, and it consists of several stages and components. The stakeholder and community engagement goes throughout the update. So that's what we're here for tonight. We're here to hear from you and learn from you. We review the previous housing element and update all the background documentation. This includes a needs assessment, which provides a profile of demographic and housing related data, an analysis of fair housing, which looks at fair housing through outreach, enforcement, land use patterns, and disproportionate needs, and an analysis of the city's regulations and governmental and non-governmental constraints to development. We conduct an inventory of the city's land through the sites analysis to demonstrate the sites that are available to accommodate the housing to ensure that capacity exists for development to meet the city's needs. And the final housing element consists of what is kind of like an action plan. Like I said, it has goals, policies, and programs. And these are really the recommended actions to be taken over the next 8 years to assist in meeting the city's housing needs.
El elemento de vivienda es un proceso de planificación extenso que consta de varias etapas y componentes. La participación de partes interesadas y la comunidad continúa a lo largo de la actualización. También revisamos el elemento de vivienda anterior y actualizamos todos los documentos, incluyendo una evaluación de necesidades que provee un perfil de datos demográficos y de la vivienda. un análisis de la vivienda justa que analiza la vivienda justa a través del alcance comunitario, la aplicación y las necesidades desproporcionadas. Un análisis de regulaciones de la ciudad y las limitaciones gubernamentales y no gubernamentales para el desarrollo. Conducimos un inventario de la tierra de la ciudad a través del análisis de sitios para demostrar los sitios que están disponibles para acomodar viviendas a fin de garantizar que exista capacidad de desarrollo para satisfacer las necesidades de la ciudad. Estos componentes informan al final un plan de acción del elemento de vivienda que contiene metas, políticas y programas que son acciones recomendadas a tomar durante los próximos 8 años.
All right, thanks, Janet. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the goals, policies, objectives, and programs of the housing element are and how they relate to one another. It's helpful to visualize this as a pyramid where we become more and more specific as we go down. So we start high level with the goals. Goals are ends, they're not actions. They represent the citywide values and direction. Policies are statements that guide decision-making to implement those overarching goals. Objectives are measurable steps toward achieving the goals. And then the programs are those actions that should be taken in order to achieve those goals and policies and objectives.
Entonces, hablemos un poco sobre cuáles son las metas, políticas, objetivos y programas del elemento de vivienda y cómo se relacionan el uno al otro. Es útil visualizar esto como una pirámide en la que nos volvemos más y más específicos a medida que bajamos. Empezamos con las metas. Las metas son fines, no acciones, y presentan los valores y la dirección de toda la ciudad. Las políticas son declaraciones que guían las decisiones para implementar los objetivos generales. Y los objetivos son pasos medibles hacia el logro de las metas. Programas son aquellas acciones que se deben tomar para lograr las metas políticas y objetivos.
All right. Okay, and then just to touch on some of what we've heard to date, again, this is our third public workshop, and we've had a survey that many have participated in, and we've also had 2 joint sessions with both the City Council and the Planning Commission.
Muy bien, ahora revisaremos los temas que hemos escuchado hasta la fecha. Para darles un breve resumen de nuestro alcance comunitario, este es nuestro tercer taller público. Hemos tenido una encuesta en la que muchos han participado y también hemos tenido 4 sesiones públicas.
All right, so some of what we've heard from you includes a need for, and these are just high level on the screen here, housing for working families. We've been hearing this a lot. We often refer to this as missing middle housing. We think of this as being rental and ownership opportunities that are more affordable for those moderate income earners. Supportive housing. Supportive housing, it provides permanent housing paired with supportive services for those that were formerly experiencing homelessness. Affordable housing, this is a key one. Generally speaking, this is in reference to housing units that are required to be rented or sold to lower income households. And then affordable ownership. This really ties in with the housing for working families, but just increasing opportunities for those middle income earners that are trying to enter into home ownership. And finally, housing for seniors or older adults, students, and veterans. We heard a lot of this at our last meeting, and we all recognize that some in our community, they may face a unique set of challenges, and it's important for us to do our part to create a pathway of opportunity for those with unique or special needs. And so that's a lot of what we've been hearing from you so far.
Algo de lo que hemos escuchado de ustedes incluye la necesidad de la vivienda para familias trabajadoras. Pensamos en esto como oportunidades para comprar y alquilar propiedades que son más asequibles para aquellas personas con ingresos moderados. Vivienda de apoyo que provee vivienda permanente junto con servicios de apoyo para aquellos que anteriormente estaban sin hogar. También vivienda asequible. En términos generales, esto se refiere a unidades de vivienda que deben alquilarse o venderse a hogares de bajos ingresos. Propiedad asequible Esto realmente se relaciona con vivienda para las familias trabajadoras y para aquellos trabajadores de ingresos medios que están tratando de comprar una propiedad. Y finalmente, alojamiento para personas mayores o adultos mayores, estudiantes y veteranos. Todos reconocemos que algunos en nuestra comunidad pueden enfrentar desafíos únicos y es importante para nosotros hacer nuestra parte para crear oportunidades para aquellos con necesidades únicas o especiales.
All right. Thank you, Janet. Okay, so if you did join us at the last community meeting, you may remember that we went over some housing policies for consideration. We've gone through all of the feedback received to date, and we've started drafting our housing element based on your feedback. We want to go into detail on the goals that we've drafted, as well as some of the policies, and we will touch on what some of the programs would look like that would implement these policies. The objective of this review is to prepare you for when the draft housing element will be released for public review. Kevin mentioned that earlier. We want to be sure that the housing element is something that you're ready to review so that we can really make the best use of your time and to be able to provide feedback that helps us meet Indio's collective vision through a plan that really reflects your priorities.
Bien, entonces, si se unió a la última junta, puede recordar que revisamos algunas políticas de vivienda para su consideración. Hemos revisado todos los comentarios recibidos y comenzado a preparar nuestro elemento de vivienda basado de sus comentarios. Queremos entrar en detalles sobre las metas y políticas que hemos preparado. También hablaremos de algunos de los programas que implementarían estas políticas. El objetivo de esta revisión es para prepararlos para cuando el proyecto de elemento de vivienda se publique para revisión pública. Queremos estar seguros de que el elemento de vivienda es algo que ustedes están equipados para revisar y poder proveer comentarios que nos ayudará a todos a cumplir con la visión colectiva de Indio.
All right, so here for our first draft goal, we have our end statement, of course. Like we said, goals are end statements. An adequate supply and diverse range of housing types that aligns with the need of all households. This is a pretty broad end statement, but let's walk through some of the policies. The first example, to facilitate the planning, approval, and construction of housing that meets a wide range of needs for a variety of household types, creating balanced communities. This could be done through programs that increase opportunities for mixed income housing or through incentives or bonus programs. The second example, to identify and evaluate options to increase housing opportunities in areas planned and zoned for single-family residential densities. Programs to address this would include increasing flexibility in the regulations, increasing opportunities for accessory dwelling units, or what many refer to as granny flats, or through programs to increase opportunities for slightly smaller lots or slightly more dense housing within single-family zones. And then the third example here, facilitate the development of housing for vulnerable and special needs populations through programs that incentivize housing to meet these needs. This broadly addresses housing as it relates to segments of the population that may need a stronger path to opportunities for housing that suits their individual needs, including those with a disability or older adults, even extremely low-income households. This can most easily be done through the reduction of barriers in permitting to further encourage uses that meet the needs of vulnerable populations, a robust density bonus program that incentivizes housing to meet the needs of those with special needs, and through resources or incentives that connect developers to information related to increased accessibility for those with disabilities.
Entonces, la primera meta, tenemos nuestra declaración final, un suministro adecuado y diversidad de tipos de vivienda que se alinea con las necesidades de todos los hogares. Bueno, repasemos las políticas. El primer ejemplo es facilitar la planificación, aprobación y construcción de viviendas que satisfagan las necesidades para una variedad de tipos de hogares, creando comunidades equilibradas Esto podría hacerse a través de programas que aumenten las oportunidades de viviendas de ingresos mixtos o por medio de programas de incentivos o bonificaciones. El segundo ejemplo es identificar y evaluar opciones para aumentar las oportunidades de vivienda en áreas planificadas y zonificadas para densidades residenciales unifamiliares. Los programas pueden incluir aumentar la flexibilidad o oportunidades para unidades de viviendas accesorias. El tercer ejemplo es facilitar el desarrollo de viviendas para poblaciones vulnerables y con necesidades especiales a través de programas que incentiven la vivienda para satisfacer estas necesidades. Generalmente, trata de solucionar la vivienda de la población que necesita más apoyo hacia oportunidades de vivienda que se adapten a sus necesidades individuales, incluyendo los que tienen una discapacidad, los adultos mayores y los hogares de ingresos extremadamente bajos.
All right, moving on to goal 2, an affordable housing supply that meets the needs of extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income households. While our first goal aims to ensure that we meet the needs of all households, which includes those lower income households, and some of those policies address the lower income housing need, we also want to prioritize those lower income households through a goal that shows where our values as a community lie. And the importance of this goal really came out through a lot of the outreach, that a lot of the things that we've been hearing from you. So we recognize that this is something that you value. And so we wanted to have that as a statement of your values. So the first policy here, attract affordable and mixed income housing developers through processes and regulations that streamline and simplify the facilitation of housing production. We recognize that many developers have maybe a type of development that they stick with. So this is really aimed at drawing in those developers that have a history of building the types of housing we really want to see in Indio, but maybe we haven't been seeing enough of. The second policy here, encourage affordable and mixed income developments that increase opportunities for extremely low and lower income households to access resources in high opportunity areas. We want to ensure that we're planning in a manner that meets the needs of lower income households. And what this means is that connecting lower income households to resources is really key to increasing opportunities for increased access as it relates to employment, education, transit use to the extent possible, parks, recreation, and other opportunities. And then for the third policy here, where processes do encourage redevelopment, we also recognize the importance of our existing housing stock. So especially as it relates to affordable housing. Addressing this can be met through a requirement to replace any affordable units lost through redevelopment so that we can maintain that existing housing stock.
Muy bien, seguimos con la segunda meta. Un suministro de vivienda asequible para satisfacer las necesidades de hogares de ingresos extremadamente bajos, muy bajos, bajos y moderados. Aunque nuestra primera meta apunta a asegurarnos de satisfacer las necesidades de todos los hogares, incluyendo los hogares de menores ingresos, y algunas de estas políticas se dirigen a satisfacer la necesidad de vivienda de menores ingresos, también queremos dar prioridad a los hogares de menos ingresos a través de una meta que muestre dónde están nuestros valores como comunidad. La importancia de esta meta realmente se manifestó a través de muchos de los comentarios que hemos recibido. Entonces, la primera política es atraer a desarrolladores de viviendas asequibles y de ingresos mixtos a través de procesos y regulaciones que simplifiquen la facilitación de la producción de viviendas. El objetivo de esta meta es atraer a aquellos desarrolladores que construyan los tipos de vivienda que realmente queremos ver en Indio, pero normalmente no vemos. La segunda política, fomentar desarrollos asequibles y de ingresos mixtos que aumenten las oportunidades para que los hogares de ingresos extremadamente bajos y bajos tengan acceso a recursos en áreas de alta oportunidad. Queremos asegurarnos de que estas planificando para satisfacer las necesidades de los hogares de bajos ingresos. Lo que esto significa es que conectar a los hogares de menores ingresos con los recursos es la clave para aumentar las oportunidades al empleo, la educación, el uso de transporte y otras oportunidades. Y la tercera política es asegurar que los procesos que estimulan la reurbanización no causen la pérdida de las viviendas asequibles. Esto se puede combatir exigiendo el reemplazo de unidades asequibles perdidas a través de la reurbanización.
All right. And goal 3, a well-maintained and preserved housing stock. This really relates to the importance of preserving existing housing and ensuring that existing housing is adequate for habitation. So to encourage the maintenance and repair of existing owner and renter occupied housing to prevent deterioration of the housing stock through educational resources, code compliance, and funding resources. This can be implemented through programs that allocate resources to the maintenance of housing for lower income households and better connect residents to information and resources related to property maintenance. To preserve and rehabilitate housing for lower income households, especially in affordable housing that is at risk of converting to market rate housing. Housing that is restricted as affordable to lower income households, it really should be prioritized for ongoing preservation of those units. Affordability can expire. Many state programs restrict affordability for 55 years, and we can work to monitor those units and work to maintain that affordability past its expiration. And then here we have assist older adults and those with special needs with home retrofits to increase accessibility. Oftentimes, as people age, their level of ability may change, and it's important to help households identify changes that they can make to their living situation so that they can better prepare for their changing needs. This can be done through education or by increasing or facilitating the production of housing that anticipates these needs.
Y seguimos con la tercera meta, un suministro de viviendas bien mantenido y preservado. Esto se relaciona con la importancia de preservar las viviendas existentes y asegurar que sean adecuadas para ser habitadas. Apoyar el mantenimiento y reparación de viviendas existentes ocupadas por propietarios e inquilinos para evitar el desgaste de las viviendas a través de recursos educativos, cumplimiento del código y recursos de financiación. Esto se puede implementar a través de programas que asignan recursos al mantenimiento de viviendas para hogares de bajos ingresos y conectar mejor a los residentes con información y recursos. Preservar y rehabilitar viviendas para hogares de bajos ingresos, especialmente en viviendas asequibles que corren el riesgo de convertirse en viviendas a precio de mercado. Las viviendas que están restringidas como asequibles para hogares de menores ingresos deben de ser priorizadas porque la asequibilidad se puede expirar. Ayudar a los adultos mayores y a las personas con necesidades especiales con las modificaciones en el hogar para aumentar la accesibilidad. Generalmente, cuando envejecen las personas, su nivel de capacidad puede cambiar. Y es importante ayudar a los hogares a identificar los cambios que pueden hacer para prepararse mejor para las necesidades cambiantes. Esto se puede hacer a través de la educación o aumentando o facilitando la producción que se anticipe a estas necesidades.
All right, and I hope everyone's hanging in there. We have 3 more goals, but these move a little more quickly. All right, so goal 4, quality rental and ownership housing opportunities for all. One thing we've been hearing from the community is that there's a strong need for rental and ownership opportunities, especially for lower income households. And we want to ensure that the strategies of the housing element aim to meet the needs of a household, no matter what that income is. Goal 4 focuses on bolstering existing resources and identifying new and creative ways for accessing resources. Rental assistance can be used to assist households with their housing costs to ensure that they have money left left over for other expenses and possibly savings. And creative financing and development models such as community ownership could increase opportunities for buy-in to property for those that would not traditionally be able to get into the market. And also this could work to help extend long-term affordability.
La cuarta meta es oportunidades de vivienda de calidad para todos los que desean alquilar o comprar. Una cosa que hemos escuchado de la comunidad es que existe una gran necesidad de oportunidades de alquilar y de comprar, y queremos asegurarnos de que las estrategias del elemento de vivienda apunten a satisfacer las necesidades de un hogar sin importar sus ingresos. La cuarta meta se centra en reforzar los recursos existentes e identificar recursos nuevos y creativos. La asistencia para el alquiler se puede utilizar para ayudar a los hogares con sus costos de vivienda, para asegurarse de que les quede dinero para otros gastos y posiblemente ahorros. Y los modelos creativos de financiamiento y desarrollo, como la propiedad comunitaria, podrían aumentar las oportunidades de compra de propiedades para aquellos que tradicionalmente no podrían ingresar al mercado, y también podrían extender la asequibilidad a largo plazo.
All right, and moving forward, goal 5, enhanced quality of life free from displacement. The first policy here, equitably invest in communities by strengthening resources and opportunities in disadvantaged or under-resourced areas. When we invest in our parks, sidewalks, and even investments in planning, we want to be sure that we distribute those investments in an equitable manner, specifically in areas with lower income households or where there is planned or existing affordable housing. When resources become available, we want to be sure we are prioritizing investments in areas where there's the strongest need. So that's what that's really aimed at. The second policy listed here, new financing tools and methods can be identified and explored for needed infrastructure. This can be through programs that identify areas appropriate for infrastructure financing, grant pursuits to assist with some funding where there's a need, or through increased collaboration with other agencies and departments to make sure that priorities are being aligned with the policies of the housing element. And then third here, reduce displacement risk by increasing opportunities for ownership and the supply of affordable housing. As communities are better connected to improved resources through investments, we also want to be sure this is done in a manner that does not cause displacement. So really the best strategy to increase opportunities for housing ownership and affordable housing, this is really at key strategies of the housing element related to increasing ownership and affordable housing access, which the housing element really aims to address.
Quinta meta, mejorar la calidad de vida sin desplazamiento. Invertir de manera equitativa en las comunidades, fortaleciendo los recursos y las oportunidades en áreas desfavorecidas o de bajos recursos. Cuando invertimos en nuestros parques, banquetas e incluso inversiones en planificación, queremos estar seguros de distribuir estas inversiones de manera equitativa y donde las áreas con hogares de bajos ingresos o viviendas asequibles han sido poco invertido. Para la segunda política, se pueden identificar y explorar nuevas herramientas y métodos de financiamiento para la infraestructura necesaria. Esto puede ser a través de subvenciones para cubrir el agujero financiero o por medio de colaboración con otras agencias y departamentos para alinear las prioridades con las políticas del elemento de vivienda. La tercera política, reducir el riesgo de desplazamiento, aumentando las oportunidades para la propiedad de vivienda y el suministro de viviendas asequibles. Dado que las comunidades están mejor conectadas con más recursos, queremos asegurarnos de que esto se haga de una manera que no cause desplazamiento, y algunas de las estrategias en el elemento de vivienda tratan de abordar.
All right, and then the last goal here, an equitable and inclusive city. You may have noticed that many of the policies we've gone over so far, they do focus on equity, but this goal is really aimed at addressing equity through a fair housing lens in all efforts, including housing supply and access, planning efforts, allocation of resources, and investment. Fair housing programs enforce existing laws as they relate to how housing is marketed, connect developers and residents with needed resources, contract fair housing mediation to fair housing experts, and other programs aimed at increasing equity and inclusion promote housing for lower income households and those with special needs, and consider equity through all future planning efforts.
Finalmente, la sexta meta, una ciudad equitativa e inclusiva. Es posible que haya notado que muchas de las políticas que hemos revisado hasta ahora se centran en la equidad, pero el objetivo de estas metas es tratar la equidad a través de un lente de vivienda justa en todos los esfuerzos, incluido el suministro y el acceso a la vivienda, los esfuerzos de planificación, la asignación de recursos y inversión. Los programas de vivienda justa hacen cumplir las leyes existentes relacionado a cómo se comercializa la vivienda, conectan a los desarrolladores y residentes con los recursos necesarios y también cómo contratan a expertos en vivienda justa. Y otros programas están centrados en aumentar la equidad y la inclusión, promueven la vivienda para los hogares de bajos ingresos y aquellos con necesidades especiales y consideran la equidad en todos los esfuerzos de planificación futuros.
All right, so thanks for hanging in there with us. I know that was a lot of detailed information, but we're just going to quickly touch on where we are in the process before we open things up for our discussion. So our next step is to complete the draft housing element. Once the draft is completed, we will release the draft for public review and review by the state. We're aiming to release the draft for public review in early to mid-August. Then after we receive all public feedback and comments from the state and from you, we will be working on finalizing that draft for adoption. The hearing process should begin in December with final adoption aimed for February. Once the plan is adopted, we then send it back to the state for their final review and certification.
Muy bien, sé que fue mucha información detallada, pero vamos a tocar rápidamente dónde estamos en el proceso antes de abrir la junta para nuestra discusión. Nuestro siguiente paso es completar el proyecto del elemento de vivienda. Una vez que se complete el borrador, lo publicaremos para revisión pública y del Estado. Nuestro objetivo es publicar el borrador para revisión pública a principios o a mediados de agosto. Luego, después de recibir todos los comentarios públicos y comentarios del Estado, estaremos trabajando para finalizar nuestro borrador para adopción. La sesión pública debería comenzar en diciembre con la adopción final prevista para febrero. Una vez que se adopta el plan, lo enviamos de regreso al Estado para su revisión final y certificación.
All right, thanks, Janet. Okay, so now we want to hear all your thoughts, questions, comments, whatever it is you have for us. You can use that Q&A feature to type whatever you have. You can also raise your hand and we can unmute you. And just to kind of recap a little bit of what we've gone over, this has all of the goals in both English and Spanish. All the policies that we went through today, it doesn't actually cover all of the policies of the housing element. We kind of discussed at a high level what those programs would look like, but those will also be included in the housing element itself. We really just wanted to set you up where you get what you're reading and you're like, okay, yeah, this is kind of what they were talking about. And now I'm prepared to review this. So we do have some prompting questions on our next slide, but I just want to give you all a moment to kind of take this in. And if you want to start, if anyone has a hand, wants to raise their hand or start with the Q&A, feel free to dive right in. Okay, let's see. So the question here, is this just Q&A for the goals and policies? Will we be looking at sites or zone recommendations? So we're open to all comments at this. And Kevin, do you want to speak a little bit to the sites?
Sure. So as part of the required process for the housing element update, the city does have to do what's called a sites inventory analysis. And so city staff has been working with DUDEC on looking at the available sites. That will be part of the public review draft that goes out. And we've really put them through a process, a review process to determine those sites that would best meet the city's ability to accommodate the almost 9,000 housing units that we have to plan for. And the sites range from those that have no development on them to those that have some development on them but are underdeveloped. We've also looked at zoning, both current and future zoning of the properties, and also our general plan designations. So in the upcoming public review draft that Elizabeth referred to, you will have the opportunity to look at those sites in greater detail and give us your comment and feedback on those sites. We're still working on those, so we weren't necessarily ready to talk about them tonight. But as Elizabeth pointed out, if you have suggestions for particular locations that you think the city should be looking at, whether it's a specific piece of property or a specific area of the city, please give us your thoughts and ideas, and we'll be happy to look at that as part of that sites inventory analysis as we wrap that work up and fold it into the public review draft that's coming out soon.
All right, thanks so much, Kevin. And then I'm just going to move on to our prompting questions we have. This first one here, what's your key housing concern that brought you here tonight? You're all here for a reason. And, whether that reason has changed or not after you've heard what we had to say, we'd love to hear from you about what really brings you here. And then if you do have some comments or questions about the goals and policies, we'd love to hear them. If you have other comments and questions about any other component of the housing element, we're happy to hear any of those. And like Kevin said, we may not have all the answers tonight, but we want that feedback for when we do put that draft together. We're working on it now, and we're considering everything that we hear. So hearing from you is going to just better inform us along the way. And of course, we will be revising that based on feedback that we receive. And then what are some housing challenges ahead of us? We've got a lot of actions that we're really planning out, but what do you think is going to be the most difficult barriers in our way for getting there? So yeah, I'll keep this up, and I'll keep viewing the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye out for any hands that come up. And Kevin, do we have anyone that's monitoring the Facebook Live? So we'll keep an eye on that.
We do. So far, we haven't gotten any comments, but we are monitoring it. If I might say, I know there are probably some thoughts about the housing element and then kind of more specific actions the city might take. And the housing element is something we have to do. It's kind of a proverbial checklist we have to address. But there's a second part to this effort that we will be working on after we get the housing element update. It's called the pro-housing work. And we're really going to be looking at what additional specific or more concrete actions can the city take to facilitate some of the goals that Elizabeth and Janet have spoken about this evening, and also to potentially pursue what's called a pro-housing designation from the state, which could assist the city in going after grants and other funding sources to help facilitate housing production in the city. So this is not the only opportunity to have input. There will be a second step or second phase of work after we get the housing element up done and we kind of meet that state requirement.
Okay, and we do have one hand up. Anna, I have just asked you to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, I'm a resident here in the city of Indio, and I was wondering in regards to some of these, I think those are great goals, and it's aligned with the need of the community, especially working families, and since we're seeing rising costs of rent, and for example, my coworker, she lives in a 2-bedroom apartment and pays $1,400 a month. And so she's someone that's looking to purchase a new home. So really to find those pathways for home ownership for our working families is important. And I'm not sure to what extent the outreach has been done to promote like the first time home buyer program, or if it's currently meeting the needs of families in Indio. So that's one aspect. And then, so finding those pathways, I think is important, and maybe that's like there's opportunities for that. And then in meeting with the city manager, we talked about the opportunity for linking property owners or private property owners here in the city with developers that are already working on affordable housing. So one of the ideas was to partner with Coachella Valley Housing Coalition, or perhaps speaking to our assemblyman, Garcia, to see what opportunities they are to kind of leverage the resources that are already there. And then my last comment was in looking at new housing, to really try to focus on incorporating the aspect of like walkability, and similar to what I was mentioned earlier about the resources, having those resources available, like parks, right, or clinics or schools, that it's in walking distance, and it makes it easier, right, so that people don't have to drive there. And then it also looks nice because people are using those the sidewalks, or it's just it creates like the public spaces kind of change, and they become more dynamic. And I think it's something that being that our population is growing, it would be really helpful to provide that kind of environment, the built environment and green spaces and things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna. Those are really great points. And, we'll be sure that we're touching on all of this in the housing element and prioritizing these things, because we agree with you that these are absolutely important things that have a lot of value.
And if I might take a moment just to respond. Thank you, Anna. I really appreciate your comments. On the first one, the first time homebuyer program, we're actually part of a group of cities that partnered with Riverside County on a state grant that they actually received. And there's two components to the grant. One is to actually facilitate production of affordable housing in the participating communities. So the county will be working to help make actual projects happen. But the other part of it is actually a first-time homebuyer program that the county will administer in the participating cities. So what I would encourage is, if your neighbor has interest in that, the county's working on setting up the program. So they haven't released everything yet, but if your neighbor wants to contact me directly, once we have that information available, we'll make sure to get it to her so that she can look at the program and see if that's an opportunity for her, because it is intended to do exactly what you said, which is to help facilitate her entry into an ownership situation rather than a rental situation. And the idea of connecting the different developers with private property owners, the city manager shared your conversation. I think that's a great idea, and if, we're happy to help make that happen as much as possible. And then the last thing about connections, I think that's also a really great comment. Our general plan that we adopted in 2019 really focuses on connectability, so that folks can connect to the services that they want to access more easily and not have to always be in a car to do that. So that's something that over the next, our plan is for 20 years. That's one of our goals, is to really connect. So that's a really great comment as well. And we hope to continue to do that through new development efforts and also revitalization of other parts of the city. So, keep us accountable on that in terms of whether you think we're doing a good job or not, but that is a citywide goal that our council did adopt back in 2019. So sometimes it takes a while to make it happen, but we're definitely in the same mindset as you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the response, and know that there's a group of us and community residents that are very excited about this and hoping to move Indio forward. and adopting a lot of these policies is so important to our families here. And so we want to be engaged throughout this process. So know that we're committed to it as well.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or any other hands that would like to come up? Feel free to jump in there. And I'll go ahead and move us to the next slide. Just so those of you that would like to can jot down Kevin's email, and you can send, oh, we have a hand up. Here we go. All right, Maribel, please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, and I think we were looking at the goals and also the policies, if we could include steps like for rent control as well, because I know the policy recommendations are also part of the housing element. So wanted to, and also, because I know I did see a lot of goals and policies, and maybe I'm interested to see if there's more presentation about the programs when we look at, because I know this will be the first time that we include fair housing with the housing element. So how does that look like? Some of the questions that were asked by the previous Annalisa, you know, how do we get to that? Because there's issues of class, race, immigration status, a lot of barriers for folks to have access. So how's the programming going to look like in regards to fair housing? And then one thing I do want to see if there's any way we could add in the policy recommendations, how the city could play a role and be, you know, playing a part in building community wealth, permanent affordability. Because I know we saw home ownership, but are there options like if folks want to have a condo or co-op or community land trust, that there's multiple pathways, like it's in the vision and planning for building community wealth for permanent affordable housing, because I know that kind of falls right along policies, right? So just want to make sure that's something that could be included.
Absolutely, Maribel. Yeah, thank you for touching on that. The specific fair housing programs, what we have so far are really related to a lot of the ongoing efforts. We're still working on the fair housing analysis under state requirements. And so further programs will be really tailored specific to those findings that are really specific to the needs within Indio. So absolutely, fair housing programs are something that we recognize are really important, especially for this housing element cycle. So we will be incorporating multiple fair housing programs within this housing element. Definitely, as far as building wealth through co-ops and community land trust, we are drafting some of that language, and we think that the city can work to help connect residents with some different housing groups that can help them understand the process for developing those sorts of collective ownership models, so that wealth can be built at these different in these different manners. And then we haven't heard comments a lot on rent control yet. So Kevin, do you want to speak a little bit to
that? Elizabeth's right. We haven't heard many comments from the public about rent control. And to be honest, it's somewhat a controversial topic. There are some that think it's a good idea and some that don't, but I think we'll definitely note it, and we can highlight it as a community comment, and you know, encourage you when you look at the plan to comment on that, and then remind you that this plan is going to go through a formal process. It's going to go to our planning commission and ultimately our city council. So they would encourage you to be participants in talking directly with the policymakers. The planning commission is an advisory body to the city council. So they're going to make recommendations on the policies and the programs. And ultimately the city council is going to review and decide on those. So as a member of the community, hearing from you and your voice is really important. And so I think we will note it as part of this process, the community engagement process, and then encourage you to be participants in the policy making directly by talking to your planning commission members who are citizen volunteers, our community members just like you, and then also your elected representatives as well. The only other thing I would say is going back to the building community wealth. That's a really interesting topic that's going on throughout the Coachella Valley. There's an organization called Lift to Rise that you may have heard about. And that's a topic that's going on at that organization's level. They have a goal of building 10,000 affordable housing units throughout the valley, and building community wealth is a topic that's talked about regularly. I participate in many meetings about that. So that's an organization that if you haven't connected with, I would encourage you, because I think that they're talking about some very interesting concepts that could be applicable throughout the valley. You made mention of the condominiums or townhomes and things like that. That's really something that honestly, I absolutely agree with you. We do not have enough diverse housing product in our community, and that's certainly a goal of this housing element update. We really want to increase the diversity of housing product in our community, whether rental or ownership, so that there are choices, more choices. And more affordable choices. You know, the reference that Elizabeth made and Janet made throughout the early part of the conversation about the missing middle housing, that affordable housing ownership, that also really goes back to increasing our diversity of housing products that get built in the community. So through the housing element, and then through later work on that pro-housing work, we're really going to try to figure out how do we make that happen so that there are more choices than just single family residential homes. That we have that other product that can meet the needs of our community members both now and in the future.
All right. Any other questions, comments, or any other hands to raise? Well, I do want to say we really appreciate the comments and questions that we've heard so far. I think that they've been really great. And I've been taking notes. That's what I've been doing when I've been looking down. So we really appreciate everyone, speaking up, because it's not always an easy thing to do. And we hope to continue to hear from you through this process. Kevin, should we stick around? What would you like to do?
I think, we want to, again, I want to echo what Elizabeth said. Thank you for your time. My contact information is on the screen. If you have additional thoughts or ideas between now and the public review draft that comes out that you want to make sure get highlighted as part of that public review draft, or things that you haven't heard from us that you really want us to think about, please send directly your emails to me. And I'll make sure that they get looked at by the team, which is made up of both the city staff and DUDEC. As Elizabeth and Janet said earlier in the meeting, this is really intended to be a plan that represents the community's input. There is a process to this. Unfortunately, this state mandated, so the housing element may not look exactly like you would hope it would look in terms of we have to follow certain standards of how it's put together. But your ideas are being listened to. We will identify all the community feedback, and we will incorporate where we can into the actual policies, goals, and programs, so that it represents that. And you can hold us accountable when that public review draft comes out and tell us if you think we hit the mark or we missed the mark or we need to think more. And then again, I just want to emphasize the opportunity and the need to hear your voices as part of the formal review process through the Planning Commission and City Council, and really encourage you and hope that you will be part of that process. So thank you again for taking time this evening. And we look forward to talking with you again soon and hearing from you soon.
All right. Well, that sounds like that's about it. I still don't see any other questions or comments. So good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.